I was standing in my freshly expanded driveway in Phoenix, Arizona, admiring the smooth concrete work when a silver Lexus pulled up and blocked my mailbox. A woman in her mid-50s with blonde highlights and oversized sunglasses stepped out, clutching a leather-bound folder like it contained the secrets to life itself. "Are you Oliver Reeves?" she asked, her voice already carrying that particular tone I'd come to recognize from countless online videos. "That's me," I said, wiping concrete dust off my hands with a rag. "I'm Patricia Morrison, president of the Saguaro Heights HOA board. We need to discuss this illegal construction you've undertaken." I looked at my driveway, then back at her. "Illegal? I have permits from 3 different city departments." She adjusted her sunglasses, pushing them up into her hair to reveal eyes that could freeze lava. "The HOA was not consulted. According to our bylaws, any external modifications require board approval before construction begins." "I bought this house 8 months ago," I said, keeping my voice level. "I read through the entire HOA packet. There's nothing in there about driveway expansions requiring approval." "Section 12, subsection 4, paragraph 3, Patricia said without missing a beat. "All external modifications visible from the street require written approval." "My driveway isn't visible from the street. It's on the side of my house, behind the wall." She pulled out her phone and took several photos. "We'll see what the board has to say about that. You'll be receiving a formal notice within 72 hours. I watched her drive away, feeling that familiar knot of frustration building in my stomach. I'd spent 3 months getting those permits. 3 separate trips to City Hall, meetings with the planning department, the transportation department, and even the environmental services department because my property sat near a wash. Every single form had been filled out, every fee paid, every inspector satisfied. My neighbor, Carlos Martinez, walked over from his yard 2 houses down. "Let me guess. Patricia, how'd you know?" She did the same thing to the Hendersons when they repainted their garage door, claimed the shade of beige wasn't on the approved color list. "What happened?" "They fought it for 6 months, racked up thousands in lawyer fees, and eventually repainted it a slightly different shade of the same color." Carlos shook his head. "She's relentless, man. Once she gets something in her head, she doesn't let go." I looked back at my driveway. I'd expanded it to accommodate my work van and my wife's SUV. The original driveway had been barely wide enough for one vehicle, forcing us to park in the street, which itself was against HOA rules. I tried to do everything by the book. "I've got permits," I said, "from the city." "Good luck with that," Carlos said. "Patricia doesn't care about city permits. She thinks the HOA supersedes everything." That night, I spread all my paperwork across the dining room table. My wife, Sophie, came home from her nursing shift at Phoenix General and found me surrounded by documents. "What's all this?" she asked, setting down her bag. "HOA drama," I said. "The president says our driveway is illegal." Sophie looked out the window at the driveway that had cost us $18,000. "We have permits." She says we needed HOA approval first. Did we? I pulled out the CC and Articus, the covenants, conditions, and restrictions document I'd received when we closed on the house. "According to this, we need approval for structures, paint colors, and landscaping changes. Nothing about driveways." Sophie sat down next to me, still in her scrubs. "What's Section 12, subsection 4, paragraph 3? I flipped through the pages until I found it. "All external modifications visible from the street or neighboring properties require written approval from the Architectural Review Committee." Is our driveway visible from the street? Not really. You'd have to be standing in a very specific spot to see any part of it. Then what's the problem? I think Patricia just likes having problems. The formal notice arrived 2 days later, delivered by certified mail. I had to sign for it, which felt unnecessarily dramatic. The letter was printed on heavy cardstock with the HOA logo embossed at the top. "Dear Mr. Reeves," it began. "It has come to the attention of the Sagaro Heights HOA Board of Directors that you have undertaken significant construction on your property, located at 4782 Desert Willow Drive, without obtaining prior written approval from the Architectural Review Committee. This is in direct violation of the community's CC and RTCS, specifically Section 12.4.3. You are hereby ordered to cease all construction activities immediately and appear before the board at our next scheduled meeting on Thursday, March 14th, at 7 p.m. in the community center. Failure to comply will result in daily fines of $150 until the violation is remedied. Sincerely, Patricia Morrison, HOA Board President." I read it 3 times, feeling my blood pressure rise with each pass. March 14th was only a week away. I called the city's planning department the next morning. A woman named Rachel answered. "I'm calling about permits I obtained for a driveway expansion," I said. "My HOA is claiming I needed their approval first." "You have your permit number," I gave it to her. "Let me pull that up." I heard typing. "Okay, I see it here. Residential driveway expansion approved January 19th. What's the issue?" "The HOA says I violated their rules by not getting their approval." Rachel was quiet for a moment. "The city doesn't require HOA approval to issue permits. If your HOA has specific requirements, that's a private matter between you and them. But your permits are valid and legal. So I didn't do anything wrong. Not as far as the city is concerned. You followed all municipal codes, obtained proper permits, and passed all inspections. Your driveway is completely legal." I thanked her and hung up, but I didn't feel any better. Legal according to the city didn't seem to matter much when facing an HOA with a vendetta. Thursday arrived too quickly. I gathered all my permits, the original CC and RTCS, and printed copies of the relevant city codes. Sophie wanted to come with me, but she had to work a double shift. Carlos offered to attend as moral support, but I told him I'd handle it. The community center was a low, sprawling building near the entrance to our development. I'd never been inside before. The meeting room was set up like a courtroom, with a long table at the front for the board members and rows of chairs facing them. About 15 other residents were scattered throughout the room, some clearly there for their own business with the board. Patricia sat in the center of the board table, flanked by 4 other members I didn't recognize. She wore a navy blazer and had reading glasses perched on her nose, giving her the appearance of someone very serious and important. "The meeting will now come to order," Patricia said, banging a gavel that seemed excessive for an HOA meeting. "First order of business, the unauthorized construction at 4782 Desert Willow Drive." I stood up, my folder of documents clutched in my hand. "Mr. Reeves," Patricia said, "please approach the board." I walked to the front of the room, feeling like I was on trial. In a way, I suppose I was. "You received our notice regarding your violation?" Patricia asked. "I did, but I don't believe I've violated anything." One of the other board members, an older man with white hair, spoke up. "You expanded your driveway without HOA approval." "I expanded my driveway with permits from 3 city departments," I said, opening my folder. "The planning department, the transportation department, and environmental services. Every single inspection passed. City permits are irrelevant," Patricia said. "This community has rules that supersede city regulations." "That's not how laws work," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "The city has jurisdiction over construction permits. The HOA can have aesthetic requirements, but you can't override municipal code. Patricia's expression hardened. Section 12, subsection 4, paragraph 3 clearly states that external modifications require board approval. My driveway isn't visible from the street, I said. It's on the side of my house, behind my existing wall. And even if it were visible, the CC and Articus don't specifically mention driveways in the list of modifications requiring approval. All modifications means all modifications, the white-haired man said. I pulled out my copy of the CC and Articus and read directly from the page. Structures, including but not limited to sheds, gazebos, and permanent shade installations. Paint colors for any exterior surface. Landscaping changes including tree removal, significant plantings, or hardscape installations. Driveways aren't mentioned. Driveways are hardscape, Patricia said quickly. No, driveway expansions are specifically handled by city code. Hardscape in the context of HOA regulations refers to decorative elements like stone walls, water features, and patio installations. I checked with a real estate attorney. That was a lie. I hadn't checked with an attorney yet, but I'd done extensive research online, and I was fairly confident in my interpretation. Patricia leaned forward. When did you check with an attorney? Does it matter? The point is that I have legal permits from the proper authorities. You can't fine me for having a legal driveway. We can and we will, Patricia said. The board has voted to impose daily fines of $150 beginning tomorrow until the driveway is removed or you receive proper approval. I'm not removing an $18,000 driveway, I said, my voice rising despite my best efforts to stay calm. Then I suggest you apply for approval, Patricia said. Next order of business. I stood there for a moment, stunned. That's it. You're not even going to look at my permits. Your permits are not relevant to this proceeding, Patricia said. Please sit down, Mr. Reeves. I returned to my seat, my hands shaking with anger. The rest of the meeting passed in a blur. I heard something about pool maintenance schedules and a discussion about holiday decoration policies, but none of it registered. All I could think about was $150 a day. After the meeting ended, a younger woman approached me in the parking lot. She had dark hair pulled back in a ponytail and wore business casual clothes. I'm Jennifer Vasquez, she said. I'm one of the board members, the one who didn't say anything in there. Okay. I voted against the fine, she said. For what it's worth, I think Patricia is overstepping. Then why didn't you say something? Jennifer glanced back at the community center. Because Patricia controls 3 votes on the board, mine and 1 other vote don't matter. She always gets what she wants. This is insane. I know. Look, my advice, get a lawyer, a real one. Patricia has tangled with 3 different homeowners in the past 2 years, and she only backed down once, when someone threatened to sue the HOA and her personally. Personally, for harassment and abuse of power. It's possible in Arizona if you can prove the board president is acting outside the scope of their authority for personal reasons. Why would she have personal reasons to go after me? I barely know her. Jennifer hesitated. Did you buy the house from the Matsons? Yeah, they relocated to Oregon for work. Patricia wanted to buy that house for her daughter. She made an offer, but the Matsons chose your offer instead. I'm not saying she's doing this because of that, but Patricia holds grudges. I drove home feeling like I'd entered an alternate dimension where logic didn't apply. Sophie was already asleep when I got back, so I sat in the kitchen and started researching HOA law in Arizona. What I found was disturbing. HOAs in Arizona had significant power, including the ability to foreclose on homes for unpaid fines. If I racked up enough fines and didn't pay them, the HOA could potentially put a lien on my house and eventually force a sale to recover their money. But I also found information about homeowner rights. HOAs couldn't enforce rules that contradicted state or federal law. They couldn't fine homeowners for legally permitted construction, and board members could be held personally liable if they abused their authority. I spent the weekend researching attorneys who specialized in HOA disputes. Most of them wanted retainers of $3,000 to $5,000 just to take the case. One attorney, Marcus Webb, offered a free consultation. His office was in Scottsdale, in a modern building with too much glass and steel. Marcus was in his 40s, wearing jeans and a button-down shirt with the sleeves rolled up. "So tell me about your driveway," he said after we'd settled into his office. I laid out everything. The permits, the inspection reports, the HOA meeting, Patricia's threats. Marcus took notes on a yellow legal pad. "You have your CC and Articus with you?" he asked. I handed him the document. He flipped through it, stopping at section 12. "This is interesting," he said. "The language here is vague enough that the HOA could argue driveways fall under their purview, but specific enough that you could argue they don't since driveways aren't explicitly listed." "So what do I do?" Marcus leaned back in his chair. "You have a few options. 1. You pay the fines and apply for retroactive approval, hoping the board grants it. 2. You ignore the fines and let this escalate, eventually ending up in court. 3. You hire me to send a strongly worded letter explaining why their fines are baseless and potentially illegal. 4. You hire me to file a lawsuit against the HOA for harassment and to seek an injunction preventing them from collecting fines. What would you recommend?" Option 3 first, with the understanding that we might need to move to option 4. The letter costs you $500. If it works, you've solved your problem cheaply. If it doesn't work, we'll have laid the groundwork for a lawsuit which will cost significantly more. How much more? Could be anywhere from $10,000 to $30,000, depending on how hard the HOA wants to fight. I felt sick. "I've already spent $18,000 on the driveway." "I understand. But if you do nothing, those fines will accumulate to $10,000 in just over 2 months. And if the HOA decides to put a lien on your house, you're looking at even bigger problems." I authorized him to send the letter. He promised to have it drafted and delivered within 3 business days. The fines started accumulating. I received a notice in the mail each week updating me on the total amount I supposedly owed. After 2 weeks, it was $2,100. Patricia included a note with the second notice. "This is unnecessary. Simply apply for approval and remove the non-compliant portion of your driveway." Sophie was stressed. We'd saved for 2 years to afford the driveway expansion, and now we were facing potentially massive legal bills on top of it. "Maybe we should just tear it out," she said one night over dinner. "And let them win," I said. "I did everything right. I got permits. I followed the law." "I know, but is it worth it? The stress, the money, the time. It's the principle of the thing." Sophie put down her fork. "Principles don't pay the mortgage. We have to be practical here. If we give in now, Patricia will know she can push us around whenever she wants. It'll never stop." Marcus's letter was delivered to the HOA board the following Monday. He sent me a copy. It was 3 pages of dense legal language, but the core argument was clear. The HOA lacked the authority to fine me for legally permitted construction. The CC and Articus didn't explicitly require approval for driveway expansions, and the board's actions could constitute harassment under Arizona law. He also pointed out that if the HOA continued to pursue fines, I would seek not only an injunction, but also attorney's fees and damages for emotional distress and harassment. 2 days later, I received a response from the HOA's attorney, a lawyer named Deborah Chen. Her letter was equally dense but boiled down to: the HOA had every right to enforce its CC and Articles as written. The board's interpretation of Section 12 was reasonable, and I had failed to follow proper procedures. "They're not backing down," Marcus said when I called him. "Which means we need to decide whether to escalate. What are the chances we win if this goes to court? Honestly, I'd say 60-40 in our favor, maybe 70-30. The permits are strong evidence that you acted in good faith and followed proper legal procedures. The vague language in the CC and Articles works in your favor, but judges can be unpredictable, especially in HOA cases. Some judges are very pro-HOA and believe in the sanctity of private community rules. And if we lose, you'd likely be on the hook for the fines plus the HOA's legal fees. Could be substantial." I talked it over with Sophie again that night. She was exhausted from a 12-hour shift and didn't have the energy to argue. "Just do what you think is right," she said. "I trust you." But her voice didn't sound trusting. It sounded resigned. I authorized Marcus to file the lawsuit. The filing fee alone was $400, and Marcus required a $5,000 retainer to proceed. I put it on a credit card and tried not to think about the interest. The lawsuit named the HOA as the primary defendant and Patricia Morrison, personally, as a secondary defendant for abuse of authority. Marcus explained that including Patricia personally would put pressure on the other board members, who might not want to risk their own liability. The response was immediate. Patricia called me directly, which surprised me since we'd been communicating only through formal notices. "This is Patricia Morrison," she said when I answered. "I want you to know that your lawsuit is frivolous and will fail. Then you have nothing to worry about. You're wasting everyone's time and money. The HOA will have to use community funds to defend against this, which affects every homeowner." "I have permits from 3 city departments," I said. "I did everything legally. You're the one who decided to turn this into a fight. You violated the CC and Articles." "I didn't, and a judge is going to agree with me. We'll see about that." She hung up. Carlos stopped by the next evening with a 6-pack of beer. We sat in my garage, drinking and looking at the driveway that had caused so much trouble. "You know she's telling everyone you're a troublemaker, right?" Carlos said. "Patricia?" "Yeah. She's been sending emails to the whole community about your lawsuit, saying you're costing everyone money, that you're selfish and don't care about the community." "She's allowed to do that." Carlos shrugged. "It's her email list. She started it years ago for HOA announcements, but she uses it for whatever she wants. That's got to be against some rule. Probably, but who's going to stop her?" The preliminary hearing was scheduled for late April, about 6 weeks after we filed. Marcus explained that this was just a procedural step where the judge would hear both sides' basic arguments and decide whether the case had merit to proceed. "It's unlikely we'll resolve anything at this hearing," Marcus said, "but it'll give us a sense of how the judge is leaning." The hearing was in downtown Phoenix at the Maricopa County Superior Court. I took the morning off work, losing income from my carpentry business. Sophie couldn't get time off from the hospital. The courtroom was smaller than I expected, nothing like the dramatic spaces you see on TV. Judge Arthur Paulson was in his 60s, with gray hair and reading glasses that he kept adjusting as he reviewed documents. Patricia was there with Deborah Chen, the HOA's attorney. Patricia wore a dark suit and had her hair pulled back severely. She looked like she was attending a funeral. "This is a preliminary hearing for Reeves versus Saguaro Heights HOA," Judge Paulson said. "I've reviewed the initial filings from both parties. Mr. Webb, you're representing the plaintiff," Marcus stood. "Yes, Your Honor." And Miss Chen for the defense. That's correct, Your Honor. Mr. Webb, give me the 30-second version of your client's complaint. Marcus had prepared me for this. Your Honor, my client obtained proper permits from 3 separate city departments to expand his driveway. He followed all municipal codes and passed all inspections. The HOA is now claiming he violated their CC and Artiques by not seeking their approval first, despite the fact that driveways are not explicitly mentioned in the relevant sections. The HOA has imposed fines of $150 per day, which are now approaching $5,000. We believe these fines are baseless and constitute harassment. Judge Paulson looked at Deborah. Miss Chen, Your Honor, this is a straightforward case of a homeowner failing to follow established community rules. The CC and Artiques clearly state that external modifications require approval. Mr. Reeves chose to proceed without seeking that approval. The HOA has every right to enforce its rules. Does the CC and Artiques specifically mention driveways? It mentions all external modifications, Your Honor. That includes driveways. But does it specifically say driveways? Deborah hesitated. The language is all external modifications visible from the street or neighboring properties. Is Mr. Reeves's driveway visible from the street? Portions of it are. Judge Paulson looked at Marcus. Do you dispute that? I do, Your Honor. The driveway is on the side of the house, behind an existing wall. You'd need to be standing in a very specific location to see any part of it, and even then, you'd only see a small section. Judge Paulson made a note. Here's what I want. Both parties will conduct a site visit together, along with a court-appointed neutral observer, to document exactly what is visible from where. That report will be submitted to me within 2 weeks. We'll reconvene after I've reviewed it. In the meantime, the HOA will cease collecting fines until this matter is resolved. Deborah stood up quickly. Your Honor, the HOA has a right to enforce its rules. The HOA has a right to enforce reasonable rules reasonably applied, Judge Paulson said. I'm not convinced yet that's what's happening here. Fines are stayed pending further review. I felt a surge of relief. It wasn't a victory, but it wasn't a loss either. The site visit happened the following week. A court observer named Thomas Grant came out with a clipboard and camera. Marcus was there representing me, and Deborah represented the HOA. Patricia came too, which she didn't have to do, but I wasn't surprised. Thomas methodically photographed the driveway from every possible angle. He stood in the street, on the sidewalk, in my front yard, and even asked to go into Carlos's yard to see if it was visible from there. From the street, I can see approximately 6 inches of the expanded driveway if I stand at this specific angle, Thomas said, marking notes on his clipboard. From all other angles, including the sidewalk and neighboring properties, the expansion is completely obscured by the existing wall and landscaping. Patricia interjected, but it is visible. Barely, Thomas said, and only from one very specific position. The CC and Artiques don't specify how visible something has to be, Patricia said. Thomas didn't respond to that. He just continued taking measurements and photos. The report was submitted to Judge Paulson on schedule. Marcus was optimistic. That report basically supports everything we've been saying, he told me over the phone. The driveway is essentially not visible from public areas, but the case still wasn't over. Deborah filed a motion arguing that even minimal visibility triggered the CC and R requirements. Marcus filed a counter-motion arguing that the HOA's interpretation was unreasonably broad and would effectively give them control over any exterior work regardless of visibility. Meanwhile, the fines were still stayed, but my legal bills kept climbing. I'd blown through the initial $5,000 retainer and had to put another $3,000 on my credit card. Sophie and I were fighting more. Not screaming matches, but tense, quiet disagreements about money and priorities. She thought I was being stubborn. I thought I was standing up for what was right. "We could have just torn it out," she said one night in bed, her back to me. "We could have avoided all of this." And then what? She would have won. She would have known she could push us around. So what? We don't even interact with her. It's the principle. You keep saying that, but principles don't pay the bills. I didn't have a good answer for that. In June, 3 months after the initial HOA meeting, Judge Paulson issued his ruling. "Marcus called me at work to tell me the news. We won," he said. "Sort of." What does sort of mean? The judge ruled that the HOA's interpretation of the CC and Articus was overly broad, and that your driveway, being essentially invisible from public areas, does not require HOA approval. He's dismissing the fines and ordering the HOA to cease any collection efforts. That's great, but he didn't award us attorneys' fees. He said this was a matter of genuine dispute over contract interpretation, not harassment, so each side has to pay their own legal costs. My excitement deflated. "How much do I owe you?" "With the work we've done through today, $8,500. I sat down in my truck, phone pressed to my ear. "Okay. The good news is you don't owe the HOA anything and you get to keep your driveway. The bad news is you're out the legal fees. And the HOA. What happens to them? They're out their legal fees too. Probably similar to yours, maybe more. But that comes out of the HOA's operating budget, which means technically all the homeowners are paying for it through their dues, including me, including you." I thought I'd feel better after winning, but instead I just felt tired. I'd spent months fighting, thousands of dollars in legal fees and countless hours of stress, all to keep something I'd legally built in the first place. But that wasn't the end of it. 2 weeks after Judge Paulson's ruling, I received an email from Jennifer Vasquez, the board member who'd approached me after that first meeting. The subject line read, "Emergency board meeting tonight." The email explained that several homeowners, upset about the legal fees the HOA had incurred fighting my driveway, were calling for a special election to recall Patricia from the board. Jennifer was one of them. "We have enough signatures to force a vote," the email read. "Patricia has cost this community over $12,000 in legal fees for a fight we should never have picked. We're hoping you'll attend the meeting tonight to explain your side of things." I showed the email to Sophie. "Should I go?" She read it carefully. "Are you going to make things worse?" "I don't know, maybe." "Do you want to go?" I thought about it. Part of me wanted to never think about the HOA again, but another part wanted to see Patricia face consequences for what she'd put me through. "Yeah," I said, "I want to go." The community center was packed that evening. Apparently word had spread about the recall effort, and people had opinions. I recognized a few faces from the neighborhood, but most of the people were strangers to me. Patricia sat at the front of the room, her face composed but pale. The other board members sat with her, including Jennifer. A homeowner named David Ortega stood at the microphone. "I'm calling this special meeting to order. We're here tonight to discuss a motion to recall Patricia Morrison as HOA president and board member. Per our bylaws, this requires a majority vote of attending homeowners. Patricia, you have 5 minutes to address the community before we hear from others." Patricia stood, smoothing her blazer. "I've served this community for 8 years. 8 years of thankless work, trying to maintain our property values and quality of life. Yes, we recently had legal expenses related to an enforcement action, but that enforcement was necessary to protect our community standards. If we allow homeowners to make modifications without approval, we'll end up with chaos. Our property values will decline. Our neighborhood will deteriorate. She sat down to scattered applause, mostly from older residents near the front. David called on Jennifer next. Patricia just mentioned 8 years of service, Jennifer said. What she didn't mention is that in those 8 years, she's cost us over $30,000 in legal fees across 4 separate disputes with homeowners. The driveway case is just the most recent. Every single time, Patricia has pushed enforcement actions that end up costing us money. In this latest case, the judge ruled against us. Mr. Reeves had proper permits from the city. He did nothing wrong. And yet, Patricia insisted on fighting this all the way to court, costing us $12,000 in legal fees. Now the applause was louder and more widespread. David called on a few more homeowners. Some defended Patricia, saying she was trying to protect the community. Others criticized her, pointing out various times she'd overstepped or acted unreasonably. Then David called on me. "Mr. Reeves, would you like to address the community?" I hadn't prepared anything, but I walked to the microphone anyway. "I'm not here to attack anyone," I said, my voice echoing slightly in the room. "I just want to tell you what happened from my perspective. My wife and I bought our house because we loved this neighborhood. We wanted to be part of this community. When we realized we needed more driveway space, I spent 3 months getting proper permits from the city. Planning department, transportation department, environmental services. I paid all the fees, passed all the inspections. I tried to do everything right." I paused, looking at Patricia. She stared back at me, her expression unreadable. Then I got a notice saying I'd violated HOA rules. I showed my permits, explained that driveways weren't specifically mentioned in the CC and Articus, tried to work it out. But Patricia wasn't interested in working anything out. She wanted the driveway gone, period. So I hired a lawyer, which I couldn't really afford. I went to court, which cost me time and money and stress. And eventually, a judge ruled that I hadn't violated anything. I looked around the room. People were listening. I don't know if Patricia should be recalled. That's up to all of you. But I can tell you that this experience has made me feel unwelcome in my own neighborhood. I followed the law, did everything right, and still got treated like a criminal. That's not what community should feel like. I returned to my seat. The room was quiet for a moment, then David called for the vote. All those in favor of recalling Patricia Morrison from the board. Hands went up throughout the room. I raised mine. All those opposed, fewer hands. David counted carefully. The motion passes. Patricia Morrison is hereby recalled from the board, effective immediately. Jennifer Vasquez as vice president, you'll assume the role of president until the next regular election. Patricia stood up, gathered her leather folder, and walked out of the room without a word. I watched her go, feeling a mix of satisfaction and something else I couldn't quite identify. Pity, maybe. After the meeting, several homeowners approached me to apologize for what I'd gone through. A man named Richard told me Patricia had tried to fine him for having the wrong color mailbox. A woman named Susan said Patricia had threatened her over Christmas decorations that stayed up too long. "She's been a nightmare for years," Susan said. But she always had enough support from the older residents who liked her hard line on rules. This lawsuit finally pushed people over the edge. Jennifer found me before I left. "Thank you for coming tonight. I wasn't sure I should. Your testimony made a difference. People needed to hear what you went through. What happens now? We'll need to elect new board members. I'm hoping to bring in people who understand that an HOA should serve the community, not rule it with an iron fist. Good luck with that. Will you consider running? We could use people who have seen the problems firsthand." I laughed. No thanks. I've had enough of HOA drama to last me a lifetime. Life slowly returned to normal over the following weeks. Sophie and I started getting along better without the constant stress of the lawsuit hanging over us. I paid off my credit card debt by taking on extra carpentry jobs. The new driveway continued to serve its purpose, giving us space for both vehicles. Then, in August, I received a letter from Patricia's attorney. Not the HOA's attorney, but Patricia's personal lawyer. My stomach dropped when I opened it. "Mr. Reeves," it read. "I represent Patricia Morrison in a defamation claim against you. During the June 15th HOA meeting, you made statements that damaged Miss Morrison's reputation in the community. Specifically, you accused her of treating you like a criminal and implied that she acted improperly in her role as HOA president. These statements led directly to her removal from the board and have caused her significant emotional distress and reputational harm. We demand a public retraction of your statements and compensation in the amount of $25,000 for damages. If we do not receive a response within 10 business days, we will file suit." I immediately called Marcus. "Is she serious?" I asked after reading him the letter. "Probably bluffing," Marcus said, "but I'll need to see the full letter to assess it properly." I scanned it and emailed it to him. He called me back an hour later. "Okay, this is mostly nonsense. Truth is an absolute defense to defamation, and everything you said at that meeting was true and based on your actual experience. Plus, statements made at an HOA meeting generally have some degree of protection as community discourse. I'll draft a response telling them to pound sand, but more politely. Will this cost me more money? $500 for the letter. If she actually files suit, we'll deal with that, but I doubt she will. This reads like intimidation, not a serious legal claim." Marcus was right. 2 weeks after he sent his response, Patricia's attorney sent a terse reply stating that Miss Morrison had decided not to pursue the matter further out of a desire to move forward and not prolong community discord. Translation, Marcus said when he forwarded me the email. They realized they had no case and didn't want to risk sanctions for filing a frivolous lawsuit. So it's really over. It's really over. I should have known better than to say that out loud. In September, the HOA's annual meeting was held to elect new board members. Jennifer was running for president officially, along with 3 other candidates for the 5 board positions. Sophie convinced me to attend, arguing that I should at least stay informed about what was happening. The meeting was less dramatic than the recall meeting, but more productive. Jennifer won the presidency easily. 3 new board members were elected, including Carlos, who decided to run after I told him about Jennifer's invitation. Jennifer's first act as president was to propose a comprehensive review of the CC and Articus to clarify vague language and remove overly restrictive rules. "We need rules that make sense and protect property values," she said during her acceptance speech. "But we also need to be reasonable and recognize that homeowners have rights. The goal is to maintain a pleasant community, not to micromanage everyone's lives." The proposal passed unanimously. In October, I learned from Carlos, now a board member, that Patricia had moved out of Saguaro Heights. She'd sold her house and relocated to Tucson. "Good riddance," Sophie said when I told her, but I felt oddly ambivalent about it. Patricia had made my life difficult for months, cost me thousands of dollars, and created enormous stress. But she'd also been a person who clearly cared about the community, even if her methods were terrible. She'd just taken it too far, let power go to her head, and refused to admit when she was wrong. In November, the revised CC and Articus were published for community review. The new language was much clearer about what required approval and what didn't. Driveways were explicitly listed as not requiring pre-approval, though they still needed to comply with city codes. "You should feel good about this," Carlos said one evening when he stopped by. "None of these changes would have happened if you hadn't fought back. I didn't do it to change the system. I just wanted to keep my driveway. Sometimes the best activism is just standing up for yourself." The following month, I received a check in the mail from the HOA for $375. A note explained it was a refund of a special assessment that had been levied earlier in the year to cover legal expenses. The new board had voted to reimburse homeowners since the legal fight had been unnecessary. It wasn't much compared to what I'd spent on my own legal fees, but it was something. Sophie suggested we use it for a nice dinner out. So we went to our favorite restaurant in downtown Phoenix and tried to leave HOA drama behind us in January. Almost a year after I'd first expanded my driveway, I was doing some yard work when a car pulled up to my house. A young couple got out, looking around the neighborhood with that specific expression people have when they're house hunting. "Excuse me," the man said, walking up my driveway. "Do you live here?" "I do." "We're thinking about buying in this neighborhood. Can I ask you about the HOA?" "We've heard mixed things." I leaned on my rake, considering how to answer. "The HOA had some problems," I said carefully, "but there's new leadership now. They're focused on being reasonable and working with homeowners instead of against them. So you'd recommend the neighborhood?" I looked at my house, my expanded driveway, my neatly maintained yard. I thought about the months of stress, the legal bills, the fights with Sophie, the meetings and hearings and letters. "Yeah," I said finally. "I would. Just make sure you read the CC and Articus carefully before you buy." The couple thanked me and walked back to their car. I watched them drive away, then returned to my yard work. That evening, Sophie and I sat in our garage, the door open to the cooling January air. We'd started spending time out there in the evenings, sometimes with Carlos and his wife, sometimes just the two of us. "You regret it?" Sophie asked. "Fighting the HOA," I thought about it. "Sometimes. When I think about the money and stress, yeah. But when I think about standing up for what was right, no. Even though it cost us so much, I couldn't let them push me around, not when I knew I was right." Sophie was quiet for a moment. "I get it. I was angry at you for a while during the worst of it. I thought you were being stubborn." "I was being stubborn. But you were also being brave. It's easy to give in to avoid conflict. It's hard to stand up and fight, even when it costs you." We sat there in the cool evening air, looking at the driveway that had caused so much trouble. It was just concrete and asphalt, nothing special. But it represented something more now. A line drawn, a principle defended, a small victory against unreasonable authority. A few weeks later, I was at Home Depot picking up supplies for a client's job when I ran into Patricia. We both froze when we saw each other, standing in the electrical aisle like two gunslingers in an old western. "Oliver," she said finally. "Patricia." Awkward silence stretched between us. "I heard you moved to Tucson," I said, more to fill the silence than because I wanted to talk. "I'm back visiting, helping my daughter with some house projects." More silence. "Look," Patricia said, her voice softer than I'd ever heard it. "I know I made your life difficult. I was just trying to protect the neighborhood. You could have worked with me instead of against me. I know. I realize that now. I got too focused on the rules and forgot about the people behind them." I didn't know what to say to that. Part of me wanted to stay angry, to list all the ways she'd been unreasonable and difficult. But looking at her now, in casual clothes without her armor of blazers and leather folders, she just looked like a tired, middle-aged woman who'd made mistakes. "I accept your apology," I said finally. I didn't exactly apologize. Close enough. A hint of a smile crossed her face. I heard the new board made changes to the CC and Articus. They did. Good. Maybe they'll do better than I did. Maybe. We parted ways in the parking lot and I never saw Patricia again. But that brief encounter gave me something I didn't know I needed: closure. The months passed. Spring arrived, bringing with it the brutal heat that makes Phoenix summers legendary. Sophie got promoted at the hospital. My carpentry business stayed busy. Carlos remained on the HOA board and reported that things were running smoothly under Jennifer's leadership. In June, exactly a year after Patricia's recall, the HOA held a community barbecue. It was the first social event they'd organized in years. Jennifer said she wanted to rebuild the sense of community that had been lost during Patricia's tenure. Sophie and I attended, bringing potato salad and beer. Carlos manned the grill with his wife, Maria. Jennifer circulated through the crowd, chatting with homeowners and making sure everyone felt welcome. The young couple I'd talked to in January were there. They'd bought a house 3 streets over and were settling in nicely. "Thanks for the advice about the HOA," the husband said when he saw me. "You were right. They've been great to work with. Glad to hear it." As the sun set and the temperature finally started to drop below 100 degrees, I stood in the community center parking lot with a beer in my hand, looking at my neighbors laughing and talking. It felt like an actual community for the first time since we'd moved in. Sophie came up beside me, slipping her hand into mine. "This is nice," she said. "It is. Was it worth it?" I squeezed her hand. "Yeah, it was, because it wasn't just about the driveway. It was about standing up to unreasonable authority, refusing to be bullied, and proving that one person could make a difference." The fight had been expensive and stressful, but it had also led to real change in our community. And my driveway still looked great. The following week, I was finishing up a kitchen cabinet installation for a client when my phone rang. It was Marcus Webb. "Hey, Oliver, I've got some interesting news for you." "What's that?" "Remember when Judge Paulson ruled on your case? He didn't award attorney fees, but that's not necessarily the end of it. I did some digging into Arizona HOA law, and there's a provision that allows homeowners to recover legal fees if they can prove the HOA's action was substantially without merit. It requires a separate motion, which is why I didn't pursue it originally. But given how clearly we won, and given the financial hardship it caused you, I think we have a strong case." "How strong?" "I'd say 70% chance of success. The downside is if we lose, you're out the filing fees and my time for the motion. But if we win, you'd get back most or all of your legal fees." "How long would it take?" "A few months. Maybe less if the HOA decides to settle rather than fight it." I thought about it. The idea of more legal proceedings made me tired, but the idea of recovering $8,000 was appealing. "Let's do it," I said. Marcus filed the motion in July. The new HOA board, led by Jennifer, reviewed it and made a surprising decision. Rather than fight it, they agreed to settle for $7,000, acknowledging that Patricia's enforcement action had been overly aggressive and unreasonable. "They're taking it out of the reserve fund," Carlos told me. Jennifer argued that it was the right thing to do, and the board agreed. They want to turn the page on the Patricia era completely. The check arrived in August. $7,000, nearly all of my legal fees recovered. Sophie and I used some of it to take a vacation to San Diego, our first real vacation in years. The rest went into savings, rebuilding the cushion we depleted during the legal fight. On our last evening in San Diego, sitting on the beach watching the sunset, Sophie turned to me. "You think you'll ever be able to just let things go? Or are you always going to fight every battle? I considered the question seriously. I don't want to fight every battle. I just want to fight the ones that matter. And the driveway mattered. The driveway mattered because of what it represented. If I'd given in, Patricia would have known she could push me around whenever she wanted. The next time would have been easier for her and harder for me. So it was about more than the driveway. It was always about more than the driveway. Sophie leaned her head on my shoulder. I'm glad you fought. Even though it was hard, I'm proud of you. Those words meant more to me than the legal victory, more than the recovered fees, more than anything else that had come from the whole ordeal. Back in Phoenix, life continued its normal rhythm. I worked my carpentry jobs. Sophie worked her shifts at the hospital, and we enjoyed our expanded driveway without any drama. The HOA sent monthly newsletters now, much friendlier in tone than the formal notices Patricia used to issue. Jennifer's administration was marked by communication and cooperation, rather than enforcement and confrontation. In September, I got a call from a homeowner in a different development across town. His name was Paul, and he'd gotten my number from an article about my case that ran in the local section of the Arizona Republic. I'm dealing with something similar, Paul said. My HOA is trying to fine me for installing solar panels, even though I have all the proper permits and Arizona law specifically protects homeowners' right to install solar. What do you need from me? Advice. Did you really think it was worth fighting? The legal bills, the stress, all of it. I thought back over the past year and a half. The anxiety, the fights with Sophie, the mounting credit card debt, the sleepless nights. Yes, I said, it was worth it. But you have to be prepared for how hard it's going to be. It's not just about the money, it's about the emotional toll. You need to make sure your family is on board, and you need to be certain you're right before you dig in. I'm certain. Arizona law is crystal clear on this. Then fight. But get a good lawyer early. Don't try to handle it yourself and document everything. Paul thanked me and hung up. A month later, he called back to tell me his HOA had backed down after his attorney sent a letter citing Arizona's solar rights law. He'd won without even filing a lawsuit. Thanks for the encouragement, Paul said. I almost gave up before I talked to you. That call made me realize something. My fight hadn't just been about my driveway or even about standing up to Patricia. It had been about establishing a precedent, showing other homeowners that HOAs weren't all-powerful, that you could fight back when you were in the right. In October, Jennifer asked me to speak at an HOA conference in Phoenix. She was giving a presentation about effective community management and wanted me to share the homeowner's perspective. I'm not a public speaker, I protested. You don't have to be polished. Just tell your story. Other HOA board members need to hear what it's like from the homeowner's side. I reluctantly agreed. The conference was at a hotel near Sky Harbor Airport, in a bland conference room with bad coffee and uncomfortable chairs. About 50 HOA board members and property managers attended Jennifer's session. I stood at the front of the room, more nervous than I'd been in court, and told my story. The permits, the fines, the lawsuit, the toll it took on my family and finances. I explained how Patricia's rigid enforcement had damaged the community rather than protected it. When I finished, the room was quiet. Then a woman in the back raised her hand. What would you say to board members who are trying to maintain standards in their communities? She asked. How do we enforce rules without becoming tyrants? Talk to your homeowners, I said. When there's an issue, start with a conversation, not a formal notice. Most people want to do the right thing. If they've violated a rule, they probably don't realize it or don't understand why it matters. Explain it. Work with them. Save the formal enforcement for the rare cases where someone is genuinely being unreasonable. Another man raised his hand. But what if homeowners take advantage of that? What if they see flexibility as weakness? Most won't. And for the few who do, you'll have documented that you try to work with them, which will strengthen your position if you do need to enforce. But starting with enforcement and intimidation just breeds resentment and conflict. The questions continued for another 20 minutes. When it was over, several board members approached me to thank me for sharing my perspective. "We needed to hear this," one woman said. "It's easy to forget that we're dealing with people's homes, their biggest investment, their sense of security. Enforcement actions can't be casual or arbitrary." Driving home from the conference, I felt a sense of completion. The driveway saga had begun as a personal problem, evolved into a legal battle, and now had become part of a larger conversation about HOA governance and homeowner rights. That evening, I sat in my garage with Sophie and Carlos and Maria, sharing beers and stories like we'd done dozens of times over the past year. The garage door was open, the October air finally cool enough to be pleasant. "Jennifer wants me to run for the board next year," Carlos said. "She's not running for re-election, says she's done her part and wants to step back." "Will you do it?" I asked. "I think so. It's actually been kind of interesting seeing how the HOA operates from the inside. We're not all power-hungry tyrants like Patricia." Maria laughed. "Just most of you." "Hey, I resent that." We talked and laughed as the evening darkened around us, the lights from inside the garage spilling out onto the expanded driveway that had started everything. Later, after Carlos and Maria had gone home and Sophie had gone to bed, I stood in the driveway alone, looking up at the stars that were just barely visible through Phoenix's light pollution. I thought about everything that had happened, all the stress and conflict and expense. Would I do it again, knowing what I knew now? Yes, without question, because some things are worth fighting for even when the fight is hard, especially when the fight is hard. I went inside, locked up the house, and went to bed. In the morning, I'd wake up and go to work and live my normal life. But I'd do it knowing that I'd stood up for myself, fought an unjust system, and won. And every time I pulled into my driveway, I'd remember that victory. The months rolled on into a new year. By February, nearly 2 years had passed since I'd first expanded the driveway. The whole ordeal felt distant now, like something that had happened to a different person. But then I got an email from Marcus Webb with the subject line, "Thought you'd want to see this." The email contained a link to a news article from the Tucson Daily Star. The headline read, "Former HOA President Charged with Fraud, Embezzlement." My stomach dropped as I read the article. Patricia Morrison had been arrested in Tucson and charged with embezzling nearly $50,000 from her new HOA over an 18-month period. According to the article, she'd set up fake vendor accounts and approved payments to herself for services that were never provided. Prosecutors say Morrison used her position as HOA president to create a complex scheme of fraudulent invoices and payments. The article read, "Homeowners became suspicious when HOA dues increased dramatically while promised improvements to common areas were never completed. An audit revealed systematic theft dating back to shortly after Morrison assumed the presidency of the Desert Vista HOA." I forwarded the article to Carlos and Jennifer. Carlos called me within minutes. "Did you see this? Just read it." "Do you think she was doing that here?" "I don't know. Jennifer should probably request an audit of the books from Patricia's tenure." Jennifer did exactly that. The audit took 6 weeks and revealed some concerning irregularities. Patricia hadn't stolen money outright like she had in Tucson, but she'd approved questionable expenses, paid vendors without proper documentation, and maintained sloppy records that made it difficult to track where money had gone. The total amount that couldn't be properly accounted for was around $8,000. Not enough to pursue criminal charges, especially since Patricia was already facing serious charges in Tucson, but enough to confirm that her management of the HOA had been problematic in more ways than just overzealous enforcement. "It explains a lot," Jennifer said when she called to update me. Patricia always pushed back whenever anyone questioned the finances. Now we know why. What happens now? We've turned our findings over to the prosecutor in Tucson. It might help establish a pattern of behavior. Beyond that, we're just focused on moving forward and making sure our current financial controls are strong. Patricia's trial in Tucson happened in June. I didn't attend, but Marcus sent me occasional updates. She pleaded guilty to multiple counts of fraud and embezzlement and was sentenced to 3 years in prison and ordered to pay full restitution. "Justice served," Sophie said when I told her about the sentence. I wasn't sure how I felt about it. Patricia had made my life difficult, but seeing her go to prison felt like a tragedy. Someone who'd probably started out wanting to serve her community had let power and control corrupt her completely. "I wonder if she would have stopped if someone had pushed back earlier," I said. "You can't blame yourself for her choices." "I'm not. I'm just thinking about how power can change people. Patricia probably thought she was always doing the right thing, right up until she wasn't." In July, the neighborhood held another community barbecue. It had become an annual tradition under Jennifer's leadership, a way to maintain the sense of community that had been missing for so long. I manned the grill this time, flipping burgers and hot dogs while neighbors chatted and kids ran around the community center lawn. Sophie was helping set up tables and serving food. Carlos, now HOA president, was organizing games for the kids. The young couple from 3 streets over came by with their new baby, a little girl named Emma. They'd settled into the neighborhood perfectly, attending meetings and participating in community events. "Thanks again for the advice about the HOA," the husband said, bouncing Emma gently. "You were right about everything. Just glad it worked out." "We heard about the whole situation with the former president. Crazy stuff." "Yeah, but that's over now. Things are better." And they were. The HOA ran smoothly under Carlos's leadership. Rules were enforced reasonably and consistently. Homeowners felt heard and respected. Property values remained strong. My driveway continued to serve its purpose, providing space for both vehicles without any drama or conflict. As the barbecue wound down and the sun set behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, I stood with Sophie looking out at our neighbors. "We did good here," she said. "We did. Not just with the driveway, with the whole thing. You stood up when it was hard and it made a real difference." I pulled her close. "We stood up. You supported me even when you didn't want to. That's what marriage is. Supporting each other through the stupid fights over driveways," I laughed. "Is that in the vows? I don't remember that part." "It's in the fine print." We drove home as the streetlights flickered on, pulling into the driveway that had started everything. Inside, I filed away the latest HOA newsletter with all the others, a growing stack of documents that told the story of a community transformed. The legal bills were paid off. The driveway was still perfect. Sophie and I were stronger than ever. The neighborhood had become an actual community. And somewhere in a prison in Tucson, Patricia Morrison was serving her sentence, a cautionary tale about what happens when power goes unchecked, and when people forget that rules are supposed to serve communities, not the other way around. I thought about Paul, the guy who'd called me for advice about his solar panels. I thought about the HOA board members at the conference who'd listened to my story. I thought about all the homeowners who'd struggle with their own HOAs in the future. Change happens one fight at a time, one person willing to stand up at a time. My fight had been about a driveway, but the principle applied to everything. Stand up for what's right, even when it's hard. Document everything. Get proper permits. Don't back down when you know you're right. And maybe, just maybe, you can change things for the better. That night, lying in bed, I thought about everything one more time. The stress, the legal bills, the fights, the victory, the changes that followed. All of it stemming from a simple home improvement project that should have been routine. Sophie was already asleep next to me, her breathing soft and steady. Outside, the Phoenix night was quiet except for the distant sound of traffic. I closed my eyes and smiled. Tomorrow I'd wake up, go to work, come home to my house in my neighborhood with my expanded driveway. A normal day in a normal life, made possible because I'd refused to accept unreasonable authority. Some battles are worth fighting. This one definitely was, and I'd do it all again in a heartbeat.